If you want your dinner, old man, you can get down on your hands and knees and lick it off my hardwood floor. My son-in-law, Brad, loudly mocked me with those exact cruel words immediately after he intentionally knocked my expensive porcelain dinner plate off the long mahogany table while making a toast. The entire opulent dining room instantly went dead silent. Over 20 of his wealthy, influential prospective investors sat frozen in their high-backed chairs, actively watching as the steaming hot gravy and dark red wine ruined my only good slightly faded gray suit. I did not yell back at him. I did not flip the heavy table. I did not shed a single pathetic tear. I simply stood up, calmly adjusted my stained cheap coat, looked him dead in his arrogant, glassy eyes, and firmly said 3 distinct words that left him looking terrified. The next day, I did something infinitely worse. My name is Archie King. To my arrogant, deeply entitled son-in-law, Brad, I am nothing more than a pathetic, retired postman who drives a rusted, sputtering 1988 Ford truck that actively leaks oil on his pristine driveway. He thinks I am a sad, miserable charity case he begrudgingly has to tolerate simply because he married my beautiful daughter, Caroline. He has no idea that the sprawling multi-million-dollar mansion he currently lives in actually belongs to an ironclad private trust that I personally control. He has no idea that the lucrative corporate firm he is currently trying so to impress tonight was quietly founded by me over 40 years ago. And he certainly has no idea that the sleek, heavy black credit card he just arrogantly tried to use to illegally pay for his catering bill is about to be permanently declined. The air inside Brad's wildly expensive dining room was thick and suffocating. It smelled of roasted garlic, expensive truffles, and the overwhelming sickening stench of a desperate man trying far too hard to physically project immense wealth. Brad had spared no expense for this specific dinner party. He had hired a renowned private chef, flown in wildly expensive seafood from the coast, and decorated the room with ridiculous, towering floral arrangements that blocked everyone's view of each other. He had invited the absolute top executives of Sterling Management, an influential investment firm. Brad was currently a mid-level director at a struggling secondary real estate development company, and he was attempting to pitch a speculative new commercial project he arrogantly called Sterling Heights. He needed their capital to fund his delusional vision. I was officially invited to this extremely exclusive dinner solely because Caroline, my sweet, fiercely loyal daughter, had insisted on it. It was my 72nd birthday weekend, and she refused to let me spend it alone in my small, unassuming rent-controlled apartment on the edge of the city. I sat quietly near the absolute end of the table, trying to make myself as small and invisible as humanly possible. I wore my best suit, which was undeniably outdated and slightly frayed at the cuffs. Surrounded by bespoke Italian tailoring, glittering diamond jewelry, and loud, obnoxious conversations about overseas tax havens and golf club memberships, I stuck out exactly like a sore, bruised thumb. Brad hated my presence. He had actively glared at me the entire night, rolling his eyes whenever I politely asked the hired waiter to gently refill my simple water glass. To Brad, I was a walking embarrassment, a glaring, visible reminder to his wealthy friends that his beautiful wife unfortunately came from nothing. The dinner had actually been proceeding somewhat normally until the main course was finally served. Brad, already 3 glasses of extremely expensive bourbon deep, stood up and loudly clinked his silver fork against his crystal glass to demand the entire room's immediate attention. To Sterling Management, Brad bellowed, his flushed face shining with grease and overwhelming arrogance. And to the undeniable future of Sterling Heights. We are actively going to redefine the entire skyline of this city. He threw his arms out wide in a theatrical, unnecessary gesture. As he did, his heavy arm swung back and slammed directly into my shoulder. The physical impact knocked my heavy porcelain plate directly off the polished mahogany table. It shattered loudly against the expensive hardwood floor, sending hot gravy, seared steak, and heavy mashed potatoes flying across my lap and ruining my only good suit trousers. The conversation around the table stopped instantly. A few of the wealthy investors visibly flinched. The hired waiters froze in their tracks. Caroline jumped up from her chair, her face draining of all color. "Dad, oh my God, I am so sorry." "Are you okay? Did the hot food burn you?" She frantically grabbed a thick linen napkin and tried to wipe the greasy mess off my ruined pants. I simply held up a calm, steady hand. "I am fine, Caroline, don't worry about it." I looked directly up at Brad. I fully expected a quick, perhaps somewhat embarrassed apology. A simple "my mistake" would have been sufficient. But Brad didn't look sorry. He looked immensely annoyed. He looked down at the greasy mess on his expensive imported hardwood floor, and then he looked back at me with pure, unadulterated disgust. "Look at what you just did, Archie," Brad snapped loudly, intentionally making sure every single wealthy investor in the room could clearly hear his cruel voice. "You ruined the entire mood. You are so clumsy. This is exactly why we can't take you anywhere nice." Caroline's eyes went wide with sheer shock. "Brad, you hit him. You knocked the plate right out from under him." He was leaning way too far forward. Brad argued, his voice rising in aggressive volume, desperate to maintain his dominant alpha male facade in front of his important guests. "He has zero table manners. He doesn't know how to properly behave in a refined, elegant setting." Brad then leaned down, getting close to my face. The sickening, overwhelming smell of cheap cologne and expensive bourbon wafted off his breath. He smirked, a cruel, calculated expression designed specifically to humiliate me. "If you want your dinner, old man," Brad mocked loudly, his voice echoing in the dead silence of the room, "you can get down on your hands and knees and lick it off my hardwood floor." A few of the wealthier, more arrogant investors actually let out small, nervous chuckles. The rest simply stared awkwardly at their expensive plates, unwilling to actively intervene. Caroline shoved Brad backward, her eyes filling rapidly with furious tears. "How dare you? You apologize to him right this instant, Brad." "I will not apologize to a pathetic freeloader in my own house." Brad roared back, losing whatever tiny shred of fake composure he had left. I did not yell. I did not defend myself, pushed my heavy chair back and firmly stood up. I am a tall man, standing exactly 6'3", and despite my advanced age, my shoulders are still broad from 4 grueling decades of carrying heavy mailbags in the brutal snow. When I stood up to my full height, Brad instinctively took a small, nervous step backward. I calmly pulled my stained cheap jacket closed. I looked into Brad's terrified, widening eyes. "Enjoy the house," I said quietly, my voice rumbling with a cold, terrifying authority. I turned around and walked directly out of the dining room. I didn't look back when Caroline called my name. I didn't look back when Brad loudly laughed and told his guests I was just an overly sensitive, crazy old man. I simply walked out the heavy front doors, stepped into the freezing night air, and quietly began the aggressive, systematic destruction of his entire life. I walked down the long, manicured gravel driveway, ignoring the bitter cold biting through my thin jacket. I finally reached my old, severely rusted Ford truck parked on the street, far away from the shiny luxury cars of Brad's wealthy guests. I climbed into the torn, freezing driver's seat and turned the old ignition. The engine roared to life with a familiar, comforting rumble. As I sat there in the dark, staring back at the glowing mansion, I let out a long, tired sigh. Brad believed I was exactly what I appeared to be, a pathetic, retired postman, barely surviving on a tiny government pension. He thought I wore cheap flannel and outdated suits because I was poor. He was fatally wrong. 44 years ago, long before I ever met Caroline's mother, I was indeed a simple, hard-working postman. I actively walked long routes in the freezing rain and the brutal snow. But I didn't spend my meager salary on flashy cars or expensive vacations. I meticulously saved every single penny I could scrounge, and I quietly invested it all into a speculative commercial real estate venture. That small, risky venture eventually grew into a corporate behemoth. It grew into sterling management. I was the silent majority shareholder. I had actively stepped back from the aggressive public eye decades ago, legally placing my unimaginable wealth into complex, secretive blind trusts. I did it specifically to fiercely protect my family. I had actively seen what unearned wealth could do to people. I had seen it ruin friendships, tear apart marriages, and rot people from the inside out. I wanted Caroline to grow up normal. I wanted her to find a man who loved her for her beautiful heart, not for her hidden inheritance. Unfortunately, she had chosen Brad, a man who worshipped money above everything else, a man who tried to project wealth, by taking on a terrifying amount of high-interest debt. When they got married, Brad arrogantly insisted they move into a multi-million-dollar mansion in the most exclusive, gated neighborhood in the entire state. He actively bragged to everyone that he had personally secured the mortgage based on his incredible corporate success. The absolute truth was that the bank had rejected his initial application because he was hopelessly over-leveraged. He was secretly drowning in aggressive credit card debt. To prevent Caroline from being devastated, I had secretly used my hidden trust to quietly buy the entire property in cash. I then leased it back to Brad through a complex corporate shell company at a loss, intentionally making the monthly payments low just so his ego wouldn't be shattered. He didn't own the house. I owned every single brick of it. I reached into the deep center console of my rusted truck and pulled out a heavy, encrypted satellite phone. I quickly punched in a secured number. It rang exactly twice. O'Malley, a deep, sharp voice answered instantly. O'Malley was my personal legal shark. He was a feared, former federal prosecutor who actively ate aggressive, entitled men like Brad for breakfast. He was currently the senior managing partner of the most ruthless, expensive corporate law firm in the entire city. "It's Archie," I said quietly, my voice devoid of any emotion. "Archie," O'Malley replied, his tone instantly shifting to one of intense, aggressive respect. "I am surprised to hear from you on your birthday weekend. Shouldn't you be enjoying an expensive piece of cake with Caroline?" Brad knocked a plate of hot food directly into my lap and loudly told me to lick it off his hardwood floor in front of 20 people. I stated flatly. There was a long, heavy pause on the secure line. When O'Malley finally spoke again, his voice was terrifyingly cold. "I understand. What are your specific instructions, sir?" "The aggressive, educational phase of this marriage is officially over," I commanded, my eyes locked on the mansion. "I want to initiate immediate eviction protocols on the primary estate. He has violated the strict morality clause hidden in the original corporate lease agreement." "I will draft the eviction notices right now," O'Malley confirmed without hesitation. "I can have them served by the local sheriff's department first thing tomorrow morning." "Good," I continued, feeling the righteous anger finally taking complete control. "Secondly, I want you to immediately contact the senior bank executives who manage his personal and corporate accounts. I know for an absolute fact that his entire lavish lifestyle is actively funded by unsecured lines of credit backed by the fake equity in that house. Since the house legally belongs to your private trust," O'Malley deduced, "the second we formally file the eviction and loudly declare the lease invalid, his entire financial foundation collapses. The banks will panic." "Exactly," I said. "I want every single one of his credit cards declined by tomorrow morning. I want his accounts permanently frozen pending a fraud investigation. He actively lied on his initial loan applications by claiming the house as a primary asset. I want him paralyzed. Consider it done, Archie. The banks will lock him out before the sun even rises." "Is there anything else?" "Yes," I said, a dark, heavy smile finally creeping onto my face. "He is currently pitching a delusional commercial project called Sterling Heights to my own board of directors in his dining room right now. I want you to contact the CEO of Sterling immediately. Tell them to string Brad along for exactly one more day. Let him believe he has successfully secured the funding. Let his ego inflate to the absolute maximum, and then I want to personally crush it. I will personally make the secure calls immediately," O'Malley promised. "He won't even see the train coming until it hits him." I hung up the heavy phone and tossed it back into the console. I put the rusted truck into gear and drove away from the glowing mansion. Brad had arrogantly told me to lick my dinner off his floor. By this time tomorrow, he was going to be begging me for a single, pathetic crumb. The next morning, the bright, aggressive sun poured intensely through the custom-made, floor-to-ceiling windows of the master bedroom. Brad woke up, stretching his arms wide, feeling incredible. Despite the awkward incident with me the night before, he believed his dinner party had been a spectacular, undeniable success. The wealthy investors from Sterling Management had politely stayed for dessert. They had actively nodded along to his loud, arrogant pitch, and they had politely shaken his hand before quickly leaving. In Brad's delusional, narcissistic mind, he was already an absolute billionaire. He was actively planning exactly how he would spend his incoming commission check. He threw off the heavy silk sheets, grabbed his expensive smartphone from the luxury nightstand, and confidently opened his web browser. For weeks, he had been actively obsessing over a wildly expensive, custom-built Italian espresso machine that cost more than a reliable used car. He had previously hesitated, knowing his credit cards were dangerously close to their absolute maximum limits. But today, feeling like an absolute king, he tapped the Buy Now button. The screen briefly loaded, processing the transaction. Then, a bright, glaring red error message popped up on the screen. Transaction declined. Please contact your card issuer immediately. Brad frowned, annoyed by the minor inconvenience. Stupid fraud alert, he muttered angrily to himself. He quickly opened his digital wallet and confidently selected his heavy, elite platinum card. It was the specific card he used solely to fund his most lavish, unnecessary expenses. He tapped to pay again. Transaction declined. What the hell? Brad hissed, sitting up in the bed. He quickly selected his primary corporate card. Transaction declined. He grabbed his primary debit card. Transaction declined. A sudden sharp spike of genuine panic finally pierced through his thick, arrogant skull. He opened his primary luxury banking app. The screen displayed an alarming message: access denied. All associated accounts have been permanently frozen, pending an internal fraud investigation. Please visit your local branch immediately. No, 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 Brad whispered, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs. He frantically dialed the exclusive, elite customer service number carefully printed on the back of his black card. The automated voice on the secure line didn't even offer the usual polite greeting. Your account is currently under aggressive federal review. We cannot authorize any transactions, transfers, or withdrawals at this time. Please hold for a senior fraud specialist. Brad threw the expensive phone across the room. It shattered loudly against the far wall, leaving a deep dent in the expensive wallpaper. Caroline, Brad roared, his voice echoing loudly through the empty house. Caroline walked into the master bedroom. She was already fully dressed, her beautiful face looking tired, drained from crying herself to sleep the night before. She didn't look at him with the usual soft, loving adoration. She looked at him with pure, unmistakable disgust. What do you want, Brad? She asked coldly, keeping her distance near the heavy wooden door. My accounts are frozen, Brad screamed, frantically pacing around the room like a caged animal. The bank locked me out. Every single card is declining. Did you accidentally buy something yesterday? Did you foolishly trigger a security alert? I didn't buy anything, Caroline replied, her voice eerily calm. I spent the entire day cooking and cleaning for your pretentious dinner party. The same dinner party where you humiliated my father and told him to lick food off your floor. Brad waved his hand, dismissing her valid pain. I do not care about your pathetic father right now. My entire financial life is actively imploding. You must have done something stupid. Did you mess up the wire transfers for the caterers? Did you accidentally overdraft the primary checking account again? I haven't actively touched your accounts in over 3 months, Brad, Caroline stated firmly. You explicitly changed all the passwords because you claimed I was spending too much money on basic groceries. Brad grabbed his hair, his face turning an ugly, stressed purple. This is a disaster. I have to secure the Sterling Heights deal today. If they actively run a soft credit check on me and see my accounts are frozen, the entire deal dies. I will be ruined. He turned his intense, hateful glare directly onto his wife. This is your fault, you and your pathetic loser father. Ever since he stumbled in here last night, everything has gone to hell. He is a curse on my life. Caroline simply stared at him, the final, thin thread of her deep love snapping in that exact moment. My father is 10 times the man you will ever be, she said quietly. You are just an angry, deeply insecure little boy pretending to be important. Before Brad could scream another horrible insult at her, the heavy, ornate doorbell rang downstairs. It wasn't a normal, polite chime. It was a long, sustained buzz that demanded immediate attention. Brad froze. Who the hell is that? He hissed. I don't know, Caroline said, turning around. But I will go answer it, don't you dare. Brad ordered, rushing toward his walk-in closet to frantically find a pair of pants. Don't open the door for anyone. It could be a reporter or one of the angry caterers. Caroline ignored his aggressive command. She walked downstairs, the heavy doorbell continuing to ring with relentless urgency. She reached the grand foyer, took a deep breath, and opened the front door. Standing on the expensive porch were three serious-looking men. Two of them were actively wearing the dark, intimidating uniforms of the local sheriff's department. The third man was wearing a tailored, expensive charcoal suit. He was actively holding a thick, heavy stack of official-looking legal documents attached to a solid clipboard. It was O'Malley. "Good morning, ma'am," the lead sheriff said politely, touching the brim of his hat. "Are you currently Caroline King?" "Yes, officer," Caroline replied, her heart pounding in her chest. "What exactly is going on?" O'Malley stepped forward, his sharp, predatory eyes scanning the foyer. "My name is Thomas O'Malley. I am the senior legal representative for the primary trust that legally owns this property. I am here to serve a formal immediate notice of total eviction." Caroline stepped back, her eyes wide with genuine shock. "Total eviction? That is impossible. My husband secured the mortgage on this property. We actively own this house." O'Malley offered a thin, practiced, predatory smile. "I assure you, ma'am, you do not. The property is owned by an secure private trust. Your husband signed a restrictive corporate lease agreement containing a strict, non-negotiable morality clause. He has violated the core terms of that binding agreement. As the primary legal representative of the trust, I am terminating the entire lease, effective immediately." "Who the hell is at the door, Caroline?" Brad roared as he came sprinting wildly down the sweeping staircase. He was wearing an expensive silk robe, his face still flushed a deep, unhealthy red from his earlier panic. He froze on the bottom step the exact second he clearly saw the intimidating sheriff's deputies standing firmly in his grand foyer. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" Brad demanded, trying to puff out his chest and project authority. "You cannot enter my private property without a warrant. I will sue the entire police department." O'Malley calmly stepped right past the armed deputies and walked directly up to Brad. He shoved the thick, heavy stack of official legal documents directly into Brad's shaking chest. "Bradford," O'Malley stated, his voice cutting through the air like a heavy steel blade. "You are officially, legally served. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate this entire premises. If you attempt to remove any expensive fixtures, appliances, or valuable property that legally belongs to the primary trust, you will be arrested for grand larceny." Brad snatched the heavy papers, his eyes wildly scanning the complex legal jargon. "A private trust? What trust?" "This is my house. I pay the mortgage to a corporate shell company." "The corporate shell company is owned by the primary trust," O'Malley explained, clearly enjoying the absolute destruction of Brad's ego. "And the trust has decided they no longer wish to actively subsidize your pathetic, lavish lifestyle. You are officially evicted." Brad's face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated, aggressive rage. He crumpled the thick legal papers in his shaking fists and threw them directly onto the expensive hardwood floor. "This is illegal," Brad screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "You cannot do this. I am connected. I have lawyers. I will bury you in your pathetic little trust." He turned around and grabbed a heavy, expensive titanium golf club that was casually leaning against the marble umbrella stand. He raised the heavy club above his head, wildly threatening O'Malley and the armed deputies. "Get the hell out of my house right now!" Brad roared, his eyes wild and deranged. The two armed deputies instantly unclipped the heavy safety straps on their duty holsters, their hands resting firmly on their weapons. "Drop the heavy weapon right now, sir," the lead deputy commanded, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. "Drop it immediately, or you will be arrested for assaulting an officer." Caroline watched the entire horrific, aggressive scene unfold in absolute, complete horror. The man screaming and wildly swinging a golf club wasn't the confident, successful businessman she thought she had married. He was an unhinged, deeply pathetic monster, throwing a temper tantrum because his fragile, fake world was falling apart. "It isn't our house, Brad," Caroline said quietly, her calm voice somehow cutting through the chaos. Brad froze, the heavy golf club still raised above his head. He turned his deranged, hateful eyes directly toward his wife. "What did you just say?" I said. "It isn't our house," Caroline repeated, her voice steady and devoid of fear. "It never was. You lied to me for years. You actively lied about the mortgage. You lied about your success. You are drowning in debt, and you take all your aggressive anger out on me and my innocent father. You shut your pathetic mouth." Brad roared, pointing the heavy golf club directly at her. "You are an useless, pathetic traitor. You come from nothing. You are worthless without my money." Caroline didn't even flinch. The verbal abuse that used to shatter her heart now bounced off her like a heavy rubber bullet. The spell was broken. "You don't have any money, Brad," Caroline stated calmly, turning her back on him. "And you don't have a wife anymore either." She walked directly past the armed deputies, ignoring Brad's violent, aggressive screams echoing loudly in the foyer, and began walking up the staircase to pack her bags. O'Malley calmly bent down, picked up the crumpled legal papers from the floor, and forcefully shoved them directly into Brad's expensive robe pocket. 24 hours, Bradford," O'Malley reminded him. "I strongly suggest you start packing your cheap suits." Brad threw the heavy golf club against the wall, smashing a hole in the expensive plaster, and stormed off toward his home office. He was breathing, his mind racing. He believed he could still fix this disaster. He firmly believed he just needed to get to his corporate office, fire a few people to assert dominance, and secure the Sterling Heights deal. He changed into his most expensive, tailored suit, grabbed his heavy leather briefcase, and sprinted out the front door. He jumped into his leased luxury SUV and sped down the long driveway, leaving Caroline behind. He drove to the downtown corporate office of the struggling real estate firm where he worked. He stormed through the heavy glass doors, his face set in an aggressive scowl designed to intimidate his staff. He marched directly to the front desk, where an efficient, hard-working young woman named Jessica was actively organizing files. Jessica was the absolute only person in the entire office who actually did any real productive work. "Jessica," Brad barked, slamming his heavy fist on her desk. "You are officially, permanently fired. Pack your cheap things and get the hell out of my building right now." Jessica stopped typing and calmly looked up at him. She didn't look terrified. She didn't look intimidated. She looked at Brad with a mixture of profound pity and absolute exhaustion. "You cannot fire me, Brad," Jessica stated firmly, pushing her heavy glasses up her nose. "The entire HR portal has been permanently locked down since 6 o'clock this morning. The parent company actively sent an urgent corporate memo to all staff. Your administrative privileges have been revoked." "What parent company?" Brad screamed, a large pulsating vein throbbing in the middle of his forehead. "We are an independent firm. I am the senior director here." Jessica turned her computer monitor so Brad could clearly read the screen. "We were acquired 3 months ago by Blackwood Holdings, a corporate subsidiary of Sterling Management. And according to the email sitting in my inbox right now, you are currently under aggressive internal investigation for corporate embezzlement. They have actively locked you out of the entire building." Brad stared blankly at the glowing screen, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocated fish. The undeniable reality of his complete destruction was finally settling in. He wasn't just losing his fake house, he was losing his fake career. He didn't argue, he didn't scream at Jessica again. He simply turned around in absolute shock and ran back out the heavy glass doors, his ego shattered. From my secure, modern penthouse office overlooking the city skyline, I watched the entire pathetic interaction unfold live through a secure, encrypted corporate security feed. I took a sip of my expensive, aged scotch. I made a quick, aggressive mental note to have O'Malley contact Jessica within the hour to formally offer her a promotion and a lucrative, aggressive salary increase at the primary corporate headquarters. She deserved to be actively rewarded for standing up to a pathetic bully. Brad was desperate now, and a desperate broke man makes stupid mistakes. I knew exactly what his next pathetic move would be. Brad needed amounts of cash. He couldn't use his heavy credit cards. He couldn't access his primary corporate expense accounts, and he had no legitimate savings to actively rely on. He drove his leased luxury SUV directly to the secure downtown branch of his primary elite bank. He parked illegally directly in front of the glass doors, leaving the heavy engine running, and stormed into the pristine, polished marble lobby. He marched past the long line of normal, hard-working customers and approached the absolute first available teller. "I need to actively withdraw $50,000 in unmarked cash right now," Brad demanded, his voice echoing loudly across the quiet lobby. He slapped his heavy, useless platinum card onto the marble counter. The young, intimidated bank teller nervously picked up the card, typed the account number into her computer, and instantly turned pale. She nervously looked at the red warning flashing across her screen. "I am sorry, sir," the young teller stammered, hitting a hidden security button under the desk. "I cannot actively process this transaction. The primary account has been permanently flagged." "Flagged?" Brad roared, slamming both of his heavy fists onto the expensive marble counter. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "I am Bradford Covington. I manage multi-million-dollar corporate accounts for this pathetic bank. Unflag the account right now and give me my aggressive money." The commotion actively drew the immediate, aggressive attention of the senior branch manager and stern, experienced man who actively despised arrogant, entitled clients like Brad. The manager calmly but walked over to the loud counter. "Mr. Covington," the manager said firmly, motioning for the terrified teller to step back. "I am going to ask you to lower your loud voice immediately, or I will have security escort you off the premises." "I want my money," Brad screamed, spittle flying from his lips. The automated system actively said it was a pathetic fraud alert. "I am standing right here. Actively verify my identity and hand over my cash." The manager didn't actively blink. Given the sensitivity of this aggressive federal request and the significant amount of corporate funds involved, we cannot handle this issue at the public counter. "Let's move to my private secure office," Brad sneered, adjusting his expensive silk tie, trying to regain his fake authority. Finally, someone with an actual, functioning brain. "Let's actively go." He followed the manager into a secure, glass-walled office in the back of the pristine bank. The manager closed a heavy door, locking out the noise of the busy lobby, and calmly sat behind his polished desk. He did not offer Brad a chair. "Mr. Covington," the manager began, interlacing his fingers and staring directly at Brad with absolute, cold authority. "The hold on your complex accounts was not triggered by a simple, automated fraud algorithm. The freeze was officially executed by a direct, secured order from a federal judge." Brad stumbled backward, his knees hitting the edge of a heavy leather chair. "A federal judge? Why would a federal judge freeze my accounts?" "Because," the manager stated, pulling a thick official file from his desk drawer, "your primary corporate parent company, Blackwood Holdings, has officially filed criminal charges against you. They are actively accusing you of prolonged corporate embezzlement, illegal wire fraud, and severe grand larceny. Every single penny in every single account linked to your name is officially, permanently frozen as crucial evidence in a federal criminal investigation." Brad felt all the air rush out of his tight lungs. The beautiful office suddenly began to spin around him. He reached out and gripped the back of the leather chair to stop himself from collapsing onto the expensive floor. "Embezzlement?" Brad whispered, his voice hollow and broken. No, I just moved some minor funds around to cover some temporary operational costs. It wasn't theft, it was just creative corporate accounting. Everyone does it. I was going to actively pay it all back the exact second the Sterling Heights deal officially closed." The bank manager did not offer an ounce of sympathy. He looked at Brad with the cold, detached expression of an undertaker measuring a body for a coffin. "The federal courts generally do not accept creative accounting as a valid defense against felony embezzlement. Mr. Covington, the authorities have already secured warrants. If I were in your precarious position, I would not be spending my time yelling at bank tellers. I would be using my final few hours of freedom to find a good defense attorney." Brad stared at him, the reality of his doom finally piercing the thick armor of his narcissism. Heavy tears began to stream rapidly down his pale face, but they were not tears of genuine remorse. They were pathetic tears of self-pity. The beautiful illusion he had meticulously built to impress the world was collapsing, and it was going to crush him beneath the rubble. "Caroline, help me," he sobbed weakly. speaking into the empty air of the office, wishing his wife was there to fix the mess he had created. But Caroline was gone. "I strongly suggest you leave the premises immediately, Mr. Covington," the manager said, standing up and opening the heavy glass door. "Before I am forced to involve the authorities." Brad stumbled out of the office, walking through the busy lobby like a ghost. He pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the bright, unforgiving sunlight. He walked toward his leased luxury SUV, only to find a bright orange parking ticket slapped firmly against the windshield, a final petty insult added to his monumental ruin. He pulled the ticket off, crumpled it up, and got into the car, his hands shaking so he could barely turn the key in the ignition. Meanwhile, high above the chaotic city streets, Caroline was experiencing a shock of her own. She had called me an hour earlier, crying and terrified, asking if I could meet her. I didn't give her the address of my small rent-controlled apartment in the suburbs. Instead, I gave her the address of the Sterling Management Corporate Headquarters building. I instructed the security desk to send her directly up to the top floor. When the private elevator doors chimed and opened, Caroline stepped tentatively into my beautifully appointed penthouse office. The walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the entire city skyline. Expensive modern art hung on the walls, and the furniture was imported, sleek and undeniably expensive. I was standing behind a large mahogany desk, wearing a tailored dark navy suit that cost more than Brad's entire leased wardrobe combined. I had finally shed the cheap flannel shirt and the grease monkey persona. Caroline stopped dead in her tracks, her jaw practically hitting the floor. She looked at the expensive suit, then at the panoramic view, and finally at me. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling with confusion. What is this place? How did you get up here?" I offered her a gentle, reassuring smile and walked around the desk to embrace her. "This is my office, sweetheart. I own the building." She pulled back slightly, her eyes wide with absolute disbelief. "You own the building? But you were a postman. You drive a rusted truck that barely runs. You live in a tiny apartment. Dad, what is going on?" I poured 2 glasses of sparkling water from the chilled crystal decanter on my desk and handed one to her. I guided her to a plush leather sofa near the window and sat down beside her. "Because, Caroline," I said softly, taking a sip of the cold water, "when your mother tragically passed away, I saw firsthand what sudden, unearned wealth can do to a person's soul. When my early investments skyrocketed and I became wealthy quickly, I watched people around me change. I saw friends turn into parasites. I saw family members tear each other apart over inheritance money. It was ugly, and it was terrifying. I reached over and gently took her hand. I wanted to protect you from that world. I wanted you to grow up grounded, with a strong work ethic and a deep appreciation for the simple, honest things in life. I wanted you to eventually find a man who loved you for your beautiful heart and your brilliant mind, not for the trust fund attached to your name." Caroline looked down at her hands, tears welling up in her eyes. "But I found Brad. I found a man who cared more about money than he cared about me." "You made a mistake, sweetheart," I said, squeezing her hand. "You confused his aggressive arrogance for genuine confidence. Brad is a deeply insecure man who tried to buy his self-worth with borrowed money. I allowed him to lease that mansion through a proxy trust because I wanted you to be happy, but I knew the foundation was rotten. I was just waiting for the house of cards to finally collapse." I stood up, walked back to my desk, and picked up a thick, detailed file that O'Malley had compiled. I walked back and handed it to her. "I didn't just freeze his accounts because he humiliated me last night, Caroline," I explained, my tone turning serious. "I did it because Brad is a criminal. He has been stealing from innocent people for years." Caroline opened the file with trembling hands. She scanned the first few pages, her eyes widening as she read the detailed financial summaries. "Embezzlement, wire fraud? Look at page 4, I instructed gently. She flipped to the specific page. It was a detailed summary of stolen funds, $50,000. She read aloud, her voice shaking. "The date, that was exactly 2 years ago." I nodded. "He didn't just steal from a faceless corporation, Caroline. He actively targeted vulnerable, elderly clients. He drained $50,000 from a retirement trust belonging to an 80-year-old widow who barely understood how to check her own statements. It was textbook elder abuse. Caroline dropped the file onto the glass coffee table, her face pale with horror. The man she had slept next to for years wasn't just an arrogant bully, he was a ruthless predator. He had used stolen money to buy expensive suits, lease luxury cars, and host lavish dinner parties to impress his shallow friends. "He is a monster," she whispered, a cold, hard anger finally replacing her tears. "He is," I agreed, "and tonight the monster is finally going to be put down." Brad was out of options, but his ego refused to let him surrender to the inevitable reality. In his twisted, desperate mind, he believed that if he could just secure a private financial partner Sumyon, with amounts of liquid cash who could bypass the frozen banking system, he could still forcefully push the Sterling Heights project through. He believed that securing that deal would magically erase the embezzlement charges and solve all of his problems. He drove his leased luxury SUV to the one place where he felt he still held some shred of power and influence, the exclusive Oakwood Country Club. Because the club billed its members on a monthly cycle, his access card hadn't been declined yet. He drove through the grand iron gates, parked near the clubhouse entrance, and marched inside, trying to project the aura of a successful tycoon. He headed straight for the opulent, dark wood bar area where the wealthiest members usually congregated in the late afternoon. He spotted a group of familiar faces, men he had frequently played golf with, men he had tried to impress for years. He plastered a fake, confident smile on his face and approached their table. "Gentlemen," Brad announced loudly, attempting to sound jovial, "I have an incredible, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity I want to discuss with you. The Sterling Heights project is officially ready to break ground, and I am currently looking for a silent, equity-holding partner to bypass some temporary banking red tape." The reaction was instantaneous, and it was brutal. The men did not greet him, they did not invite him to sit down, they stopped their conversation and stared at him. But they weren't looking at him with admiration or respect. They were looking at him exactly like he was a dangerous, infectious contagion. News travels fast in the small, insular circles of the ultra-wealthy. The dramatic arrival of O'Malley and the sheriff's deputies at his mansion that morning had already been widely gossiped about. The rumors of a federal fraud investigation and his sudden termination from his firm had spread through the country club like wildfire. "We aren't interested, Brad," one of the older men, a retired shipping magnate, said coldly. He didn't even bother to soften the rejection. Brad's fake smile faltered, but he pushed forward. "You don't understand, Richard. The profit margins are astronomical. The zoning permits are already approved. It's a gold mine. I just need a temporary war chest to fight off some ridiculous, baseless legal maneuvers from a corrupt competitor." "You are toxic, Brad," another man stated flatly, picking up his scotch glass. "Your accounts are frozen. You don't own your house. You've been fired for embezzlement. Do you honestly think anyone in this room is going to give you a single dime? You are a liability. Please step away from our table." Brad stood there, frozen in utter humiliation. The reality of his absolute social destruction finally hit him with the force of a freight train. He wasn't just broke, he was a total outcast. He was the pathetic punchline to a cruel joke. He retreated to the empty end of the heavy mahogany bar. He practically collapsed onto a leather bar stool, his expensive suit looking out of place on his defeated, slumped frame. "Give me a double bourbon," Brad muttered to the bartender, his voice trembling. The expensive stuff. The bartender, who had overheard the entire exchange and was fully aware of the rumors, hesitated for a moment before pouring the drink. He placed the heavy crystal glass on a napkin in front of Brad. "That will be $45, Mr. Covington, sir. I have been instructed by management to ask for payment up front today." Brad's face flushed a deep, humiliating red. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his black platinum card, slapping it on the counter out of sheer habit. The bartender swiped it. The machine beeped angrily. "Declined," the bartender said, his voice loud enough for the nearby tables to clearly hear. Brad snatched the card back, his hands shaking so that he accidentally knocked his glass over. The expensive bourbon spilled directly onto the bar, splashing up and staining the front of his pristine white dress shirt. He didn't yell. He didn't demand to see the manager. He simply sat there, staring down at the dark, spreading stain on his expensive shirt, realizing with absolute, horrifying clarity that he was trapped. There were no more lies to tell. There were no more fake stories to spin. The beautiful facade had been ripped away, leaving nothing but a terrified, pathetic little boy shivering in the cold. Just as the bartender approached with a towel to clean up the spill, the heavy double doors of the clubhouse lounge swung open. The ambient noise in the room died down instantly. I walked into the lounge, flanked closely by O'Malley and two serious, deeply intimidating federal agents wearing dark suits and earpieces. I was no longer wearing the faded flannel shirt or the cheap gray suit from the dinner party. I was wearing my dark navy bespoke suit, projecting the absolute, undeniable power of a man who controlled billions of dollars in assets. I walked in across the thick carpet, the entire room watching in total silence. I stopped directly behind Brad, who was still pathetically dabbing at his stained shirt with a cocktail napkin. "It seems you have a small stain on your shirt, Brad," I said quietly, my voice echoing clearly in the silent bar. "Perhaps if you want to clean it, you should get down on your hands and knees and lick it off the floor." Brad froze. He turned around on the bar stool, his bloodshot eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated terror as he looked at me. He looked at my expensive suit, he looked at O'Malley, and he looked at the federal agents standing firmly behind me. "Archie," he whispered, his voice cracking, unable to process the reality standing right in front of him. What are you doing here?" "I am here to firmly conclude our business, Brad," I said, my voice calm and steady. Brad frantically looked back and forth between me and the imposing men standing right behind me. His brain was trying to process a reality that shattered his entire worldview. "What business? You don't have any business. You are a retired mail carrier. You live in a tiny, pathetic apartment." "I do enjoy the quietness of that apartment," I admitted smoothly, buttoning my expensive suit jacket. "But I also enjoy the breathtaking view from my penthouse office at Sterling Management Headquarters. The same company you tried to pitch your delusional, speculative real estate project to last night. The company I founded exactly 44 years ago." The color rapidly drained from Brad's face. He looked exactly like a man who had just been pushed out of an airplane without a parachute. "No," Brad whispered, shaking his head in sheer denial. "No, that is impossible. You are a poor, pathetic old man. You drive a rusted truck. You wore a cheap flannel shirt." "I wore what was comfortable, Brad," I corrected him gently, the absolute power in my tone leaving no room for argument. "You, on the other hand, wore a expensive disguise. You leased a luxury car you couldn't actually afford. You wore suits you didn't legally own. You threw lavish dinner parties using stolen money to impress men who worked directly for me. You spent years treating my beautiful daughter and me like absolute garbage simply because you falsely believed you were the wealthiest man in the room. But the undeniable truth is, you never owned a single thing. Not the house, not the cars, not even your own career. I owned it all, and I just decided to repo the entire lot." Brad stared at me, his mouth open, his entire body trembling on the bar stool. The beautiful illusion he had meticulously built was not just broken, it was atomized. "You did this," Brad choked out, hot tears of immense frustration and total defeat finally spilling over his eyelids. "You froze my accounts, you filed the eviction." "I merely opened the door," I replied coldly. "You eagerly walked through it, the exact second you stole $50,000 from an elderly widow's retirement trust 2 years ago to fund your pathetic lifestyle." At the mention of the specific theft, Brad collapsed internally. He knew he was caught. There was no clever lie, no arrogant excuse that could possibly save him now. I took a deliberate step back and subtly nodded to the two federal agents standing quietly behind me. The lead agent stepped forward. He reached into his dark suit jacket and pulled out a heavy pair of steel handcuffs. The distinct, metallic sound of the cuffs rattling cut through the dead silence of the country club lounge like a gunshot. "Bradford Covington," the federal agent stated firmly, his deep voice projecting loudly and clearly across the entire room, ensuring every single wealthy member actively heard every word. "You are officially under arrest for grand larceny, illegal wire fraud, and severe elder abuse. Please stand up and place your hands firmly behind your back." Brad didn't try to run. He didn't loudly protest his absolute innocence. He was broken. He pathetically slid off the bar stool his legs barely able to support his weight. He turned around and numbly presented his trembling wrists to the aggressive agent. The heavy steel handcuffs clicked shut around his soft, manicured wrists. The sharp sound was the final, definitive period at the absolute end of his pathetic, arrogant sentence. He looked back over his shoulder at me. His face was a twisted, horrific mask of pure, undeniable defeat. The aggressive arrogance, the entitlement, the cruel superiority that had defined his entire miserable existence were permanently gone. He finally looked exactly like what he was, a weak, terrified little boy who had been caught stealing from the cookie jar. "Archie," Brad whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, you told me to get on my hands and knees," I said quietly, stepping in close so only he could hear my final, aggressive words. "But I prefer to stand. Have a pleasant trip to prison, Brad." The federal agents firmly grabbed him by both arms and forcefully marched him directly out of the exclusive country club lounge. He walked with his head hung down in absolute, utter disgrace, paraded past the exact same wealthy men he had tried to impress just 10 minutes earlier. They watched him go in total, disgusted silence. I stood at the bar for a moment, silently watching the heavy oak doors swing shut behind him. The heavy tension that had suffocated my chest since the dinner party the night before finally dissipated. The brutal, unforgiving scales of justice were finally balanced. I turned around and walked calmly out of the country club, stepping into the bright, warm afternoon sun. O'Malley was waiting patiently by a sleek, armored Blacktown car parked discreetly near the entrance. "Is the corporate cleanup finished?" I asked him. Gate O'Malley confirmed with a tight, satisfied smile. "His accounts are actively being seized by the federal government to permanently restitute the victims. The mansion will be empty by tomorrow morning. He has nothing left." "Good," I said, adjusting my expensive tie. "Let's go home, O'Malley. I owe my beautiful daughter a proper, peaceful birthday dinner." Exactly 6 months later, the brutal, chaotic memory of that horrific Thanksgiving dinner party felt like it belonged to a different lifetime. I sat comfortably in a quiet, warmly lit Italian restaurant downtown, the kind of place that didn't rely on towering floral arrangements or obnoxiously loud jazz music to distract from mediocre food. It was simply good, honest cooking served in a peaceful environment. I was wearing a comfortable tailored gray sweater, and I felt relaxed for the first time in long years. Caroline sat directly across from me, a changed woman. The deep, heavy exhaustion that used to permanently shadow her beautiful eyes had vanished. The constant, suffocating fear of accidentally upsetting Brad's fragile ego was gone. She looked radiant, deeply healthy and strong. She had moved out of the empty mansion the same day Brad was arrested. She flatly refused to take a single piece of expensive furniture or jewelry he had bought with stolen money. Instead, she had moved into a beautiful, sunlit apartment in a much quieter part of the city. She had officially finalized the divorce exactly 2 months later, easily pushing it through the courts, while Brad sat helplessly in a federal holding cell, unable to afford even a basic defense attorney. "The new charity initiative is going well, Dad," Caroline said cheerfully, taking a slow sip of her red wine. It was a good wine, but it certainly didn't cost $5,000 a bottle, and nobody was going to throw it in her face. "We successfully managed to rebuild the community center on the south side. The kids are loving the new basketball courts." I smiled proudly, reaching across the small table to gently squeeze her hand. "You have done an incredible job with the foundation, Caroline. Your mother would be deeply proud of the woman you have become." When the undeniable truth about my immense wealth was finally revealed, Caroline didn't demand expensive cars or lavish vacations. She didn't suddenly transform into a spoiled, entitled heiress. She remained exactly the same kind, deeply compassionate girl I had proudly raised. She had simply asked if she could officially take over the charitable arm of Sterling Management. She wanted to actively use the resources to actually build people up, rather than tear them down the way Brad had done for years. "It just feels good to finally do something that actually matters," Caroline said softly, a genuine smile illuminating her face. "For so many years, I was trapped in that fake house, pretending to care about country club politics and expensive dinner parties. It was suffocating." As our friendly waiter arrived with our steaming plates of fresh pasta, my secure phone buzzed quietly in my pocket. I pulled it out and glanced at the glowing screen. It was a secure message from O'Malley. I read the brief message, and a low, amused chuckle rumbled deep in my chest. "What is it, Dad?" Caroline asked, raising an eyebrow in curiosity. "O'Malley just received an interesting piece of mail at the corporate law firm," I explained, setting the phone down on the table. "It is a formally written, desperate letter from the federal penitentiary upstate." Caroline's smile faltered slightly, but she didn't look terrified anymore. "From Brad?" "Yes," I confirmed, picking up my silver fork. "Apparently, he has miraculously found religion in his maximum security cell. He claims he is deeply reformed and is currently writing a detailed memoir about his incredible spiritual journey." Caroline let out a short, incredulous laugh. "A memoir? Brad? He couldn't even successfully write his own corporate emails without aggressive spelling errors." "It gets even better," I added, my eyes twinkling with deep amusement. "He is actively requesting that the King Foundation formally grant him $50,000 to fund his legal appeal. He believes his newfound spiritual enlightenment makes him exempt from serving his 10-year sentence for grand larceny." Caroline stared at me for a moment, stunned by the sheer, unadulterated audacity of the man. And then she started to laugh. It wasn't a nervous, fearful chuckle. It was a loud, bright, joyous laugh that echoed beautifully in the quiet restaurant. "He wants $50,000. She laughed, shaking her head in complete disbelief. "The exact same amount he stole from that elderly widow." "He has no sense of irony," I agreed, smiling warmly at the beautiful sound of her genuine laughter. "He is still trapped in his own delusional, arrogant world. He still believes that if he just asks enough, someone will inevitably step in and save him from the severe consequences of his own horrific actions." "What are you going to actively tell O'Malley to do with the desperate letter?" Caroline asked, wiping a tear of mirth from her eye. "Nothing," I replied calmly, taking a slow bite of my delicious dinner. "The absolute worst punishment you can ever inflict on a narcissist like Brad is complete, utter silence. He wants a fight. He wants to feel important again. We are going to actively give him exactly what he deserves. Absolute, permanent irrelevance." As we finished our quiet, peaceful dinner, I looked directly across the small table at my beautiful, strong daughter. The horrific, suffocating nightmare was finally, permanently over. The toxic shadow that Brad had cast over her entire life was irrevocably gone. Later that evening, after I had safely walked Caroline to her car and hugged her goodnight, I returned alone to my silent penthouse office at Sterling Management. The city lights glittered far below me, stretching out exactly like an infinite ocean of bright, burning stars. I stood quietly by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the immense skyline I had helped build, reflecting deeply on the absolute, chaotic madness of the past few months. Money is a strange, dangerous thing. People like Brad believe that possessing amounts of wealth automatically makes them vastly superior to everyone else. They falsely believe that driving a leased luxury car, wearing an expensive tailored suit, and throwing wildly expensive dinner parties somehow transforms them into an untouchable king. They arrogantly think that having a heavy black credit card gives them the absolute right to belittle waiters, fiercely mock the working class, and humiliate their own family members. But the absolute, undeniable truth is that wealth doesn't actually change your fundamental character. It doesn't magically turn a bad, cruel man into a good, honorable one. Wealth is simply a powerful, unforgiving magnifying glass. It takes exactly who you are deep down inside and amplifies it for the entire world to clearly see. For Brad, the illusion of money magnified his profound insecurity, his utter lack of empathy, and his deep, incurable rot. He was so desperate to actively project an image of success that he destroyed his own marriage, compromised his own morality, and ultimately stole from vulnerable, innocent people. He built a towering castle out of thin, fragile glass, and then he arrogantly decided to throw stones at everyone walking below. He looked at me, a quiet older man wearing a faded cheap flannel shirt, and he instantly, wrongly assumed I was weak. He told me to get down on my hands and knees and lick his dinner off his expensive hardwood floor. He believed that because I didn't shout back, because I didn't react with loud, uncontrolled anger, I was somehow pathetically defeated. He never once stopped to actively realize that the most dangerous, lethal men in the entire room are never the loud, aggressive ones, shouting for immediate attention. The dangerous men are the ones who can absorb a humiliating insult in total, deadly silence, calmly adjust their cheap coats, and then proceed to systematically dismantle your entire existence without ever breaking a sweat. Brad had to lose everything: his fake house, his fake career, his country club status, and his complete freedom to finally understand that harsh, brutal lesson. And now, he has exactly 10 long years in a secure federal prison to deeply contemplate his arrogant mistakes. I turned away from the window and walked back to my large, heavy mahogany desk. I picked up a simple, framed photograph of Caroline and her mother, ignoring the expensive modern art hanging on the surrounding walls. The absolute greatest, most invaluable wealth I have ever possessed isn't safely locked away in a bank vault or secured in a complex offshore trust. It is the fierce, unconditional love I hold for my family, and the absolute terrifying lengths I will go to in order to protect them from harm. You can dress a pathetic, starving rat in an expensive, tailored Italian tuxedo. You can actively teach it how to loudly order expensive bourbon and how to pitch corporate real estate deals. But at the absolute end of the long day, when the bright, glaring lights finally turn off and the fake illusion is stripped away, it is still just a rat. And when a rat decides to attack my beautiful daughter, I don't just gently shoo it away. I quietly, systematically, and burn its entire world to the ground.